So our agenda for today then, so we're going to look at the role of the safeguarding boards and what the board priorities are for 2023-24. We're going to look at just have a little bit of feedback from Safeguarding Adults Week, and then also from the Festival of Learning, which was safeguarding, and it was all around bumps and babies. Also, mental health, so children and adults mental health. We've got a link to a resource, and what we're going to do is just have a look what's in that resource, because there's some really, really useful resources in there for you to be able to take away and use. And then Jackie is going to take us through kind of a bit of an MCA in practice. And then we've got somebody, I think it's Jan, coming to talk about a safer sleeping tool. And then we've got David O'Hanlon, Ribbons, and he's going to be taking you through serious violence duty. And then Joe's going to look at some learning from SAR. So we've got the Rochdale and Lewisham SAR. And then we've got Alison Taylor-Prout, who's going to be taking us through. Alison, what's your presentation?
So it's based on
following on.
Yeah, it's following on from the learning that Joe identified and just thinking about it in more detail.
Thank you, that's lovely. And then at the end, we're going to ask you to do a quick staff survey, and the staff survey is just adults only. So if you're working in children's, you don't need to do the survey. It is this survey is for a survey we're asking for adults. Okay, so that's our session today. So over to Liz. Oh no, I'm doing this, aren't I? So the role of the safeguarding children.
I think.
Joe, sorry, Joe. Yeah.
Okay, so just looking at the role of the Safeguarding Children Partnerships and the Safeguarding Adults Boards. So they're made up of members from across the voluntary sector, the independent sector and the statutory sector, working in partnership to provide leadership, strategic leadership to ensure that there are coordinated, effective working arrangements to safeguard children and adults with needs for care and support across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So the ways that the boards and the partnerships do this is through reviews. So that can be children reviews, so child safeguarding practice reviews, through safeguarding adults reviews, and also through domestic homicide reviews. Also audits, procedures and guidance, training and tools to support the practice of practitioners, engagement work and communications work. And then we've got a link at the bottom there when you get the slides where you can go in and have a look if you want to at the web pages for the boards and the partnerships.
Thanks, Joe. Okay. So moving on, this is the children's Liz.
Yeah, so the way we kind of organise our work is that we have a business plan, and in the business plan, so Safeguarding Adults and Safeguarding Children's will have a business plan. It tells us what the priorities are. So where have we got concerns? Where are the areas that we need to do some work? And these 6 listed here are the Safeguarding Children Partnership business priorities for children's. So the first 5 are actually repeated from the last safeguarding business plan, because we still need to do more work on them. And also we need to look at what we've done to see if it's had an impact and what that impact is. So it's about kind of auditing what the work that's going on and checking that we know that we're moving in the right direction, as it were. And so that they are safeguarding babies. We have had child safeguarding practice reviews around babies. It's an issue locally and nationally, so we need to focus on that. Child mental health, emotional wellbeing and safeguarding. I think you can understand that following COVID, that's become perhaps something that we do need to kind of refocus on. Keeping adolescents safe and supporting adolescents. So that's around the sort of area of safeguarding of harms outside the home, and how we can manage that and how we can provide services that might support our adolescents. Safeguarding children from diverse backgrounds. So it's about looking about our access to services and how we, whether that is provides equal access, whether there are any gaps. So that's quite a broad piece of work that's ongoing and probably will be for quite a while. The effective safeguarding in independent and out of school settings is about thinking about all of those clubs and various different groups that are sort of growing and a setup, and whether people who run those groups have got enough support, and how we act, give them more support, and how we know about them, and how we provide help and check that the safeguarding is appropriate. And that was a national piece of work that the government did, and now we need to kind of filter that down to make sure that we've got as much access as we can. It's quite difficult because it's quite easy to sometimes set up a club or something, which is good, but we need to make sure that that's providing appropriate safeguarding. And then transitional safeguarding has just been added more recently this year, so we didn't have this last year, and that's about kind of thinking about our children, young people who then kind of turn 18. So you're a child until your 18th birthday, but if you're suffering from abuse or neglect at 17, how then does that change drastically at 18? But it does in the eyes of the law. So we need to work better perhaps with some services and make sure that people are supported around that area from all different sort of areas. So if you think about our children with disabilities, there's already sort of transition arrangements around there, but we need to look more broadly at safeguarding people who might be at risk at that point in time. So they're the 6 priorities for the Children's Safeguarding Partnership.
Thank you, Liz. So again, the board priorities, like Liz said, we have the same, the business plan, and there's priorities there for 23 to 25, and this is for the safeguarding adults. So self-neglect is one of the ones of the priority, and there is VARM, so vulnerable adult risk management guidance, and that is currently being updated and should be available kind of early in the new year, and there's some tools for people to use with that as well. So that's coming out, so keep an eye out for that. That will be when that's completed, then we'll look at launching that and making sure that gets out to everybody. And then obviously the Mental Capacity Act, and making sure that we follow the principles of the Mental Capacity Act is really fundamental and key when we're supporting adults and making sure that we're not depriving people of their liberty. So the Mental Capacity Act, and we have got Jackie, who's going to be doing a bit of a talk on Mental Capacity Act in practice, so how they achieve 100% Mental Capacity Act. And then domestic abuse, domestic violence, so that's one of the ones that we're also looking at. From going back to kind of the Mental Capacity Act as well, we will be sharing any learning that comes from that with the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, because obviously mental capacity should be completed where required with individuals age 16 as well. So that's the priorities for the board. So feedback then from Safeguarding Adults Week. So Joe's just going to talk. We did have a Leicestershire and Rutland produced a safeguarding resources pack for National Safeguarding Adults Week, and that was on the 20th, 24th of November. And I think, Joe, you're just going to run through some of the feedback from what happened in Safeguarding Adults Week. Yeah, absolutely. So the group of the boards that took the lead on this year was the Engagement and Communications Group, which is the Leicestershire and Rutland joint group, and they produced a short video about domestic abuse in older people, and that's one of the business priorities that Heidi had just mentioned for both Safeguarding Adults boards. And the video is called Hidden Harms, Domestic Abuse Against Older People, and that's on the YouTube channel. We're going to show it, Joe. We're going to show that. Yeah, lovely. Okay, so that's that video, so you'll be able to view that. And then also there were 2 What is Safeguarding online awareness sessions, which our Engagement Officer Shobna held during the week. There was a resource pack, which Heidi's just mentioned as well, that organisations could use. And also the communications leads across all the partner organisations had a pack so that they could share information about adult safeguarding on their social media channels. So, and obviously individual organisations, perhaps your organisation also held events, training and awareness throughout that week. Lovely, thank you. So we thought it might be really useful for you to have a look at that hidden harm, domestic abuse against older people. It's only about 4 minutes long, so I'm going to do the techie stuff now. And she says, try and share this with you. Ooh, wrong one. Hang on. Just a moment. I don't know what it's doing. Not letting me share the bottom of my screen. Hang on, let me just stop sharing a minute and then I'll be able to load the video and then reshare, she says, because I've got it ready to play. Okay. So I'm just going to come back to here. Sorry, it always takes a minute, doesn't it, when you're trying to. Okay, sounds on. Okay. Here we go. So you should be able to hear this, and I'll put it on full screen.
Domestic abuse affecting older people is often under-recognised and underreported.
Abuse might happen over many years or begin in later life. Sometimes it builds up subtly over time, making it difficult to identify.
The Duluth Power and Control Wheel, adapted for older people by Dowie's Choice, shows how abuse isn't always physical and can include your partner, ex-partner, or family member trying to control you.
Here are some examples of controlling an abusive behavior.
Criticizing you and making you feel bad about yourself, stupid, or that you always get things wrong.
Saying you can't make decisions, that you have dementia or are losing your mind.
Threatening that bad things will happen if you don't behave how they want.
Sometimes these are small threats.
But they might include threats to harm themselves, you, or the people or even animals that you care about.
Taking control of your money and denying you access to financial information.
They may take money without your permission and not return it.
Exaggerating your care needs, or using them as an excuse to control your medication, what you eat, and where you go.
Without respecting your boundaries, they might make you feel like you have to follow their rules and that you can't say no.
Abuse can also include making excuses for treating you badly and blaming you for their behavior, telling people you are difficult, and presenting themselves as caring and supportive.
Or alternatively, ignoring your needs, making out they are incapable of doing things themselves and that you have to support them.
You might feel you don't have control over your life decisions, be stopped from going places and doing things you enjoy, like trying new things and learning new skills.
Or even learning to use technology that could make your life easier.
You may be stopped from spending time alone with other people, or have the time you spend with family and friends spoiled.
You may feel you have no space or time for yourself.
They might constantly check where you are and what you are doing, listen to your phone calls and read your messages or letters before you.
Abuse can also include using their physical size to scare those around them, being aggressive towards you and the people you care about, and committing physical violence against you or your property.
Maybe the behavior just started or recently got worse. Even if it's always been like this, it doesn't mean it's okay.
The good news is that you don't have to manage this on your own.
There are people you can speak to, confidentially, who can offer you support and explain your options.
Regardless of whether you want to end the relationship or not. Talking to someone about the behavior won't mean having to make decisions you're not ready for.
But it will open the door to the help you need to start feeling safer
and happier today.
Okay. just going to stop that. Thank you. Right, I'll come back to the PowerPoint. So, oh, hang on. Where's that? Wait a minute. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm just going to come back to the PowerPoint. Just get that loaded. Ready? And share. Here we go. Back on. Oh, it's gone back to the beginning. Sorry about that. Okay, so oh, there was just the campaign. That's the campaign poster, isn't it, Jo? That's been
Yes.
Yeah. So again, we're encouraging people to use that really and have that displayed. So that was just to show you that. So then we had the Festival of Learning, which was Safeguarding Babies, Bumps and Babies. So Liz, you're going to just give us a bit of feedback from how the fact that went.
So this was the second Festival of Learning that we've had, and the sort of the idea for the Festival of Learning is to involve all of our partners as far as we possibly can. So some of those groups that I was talking about before, the out of school groups, trying to get them involved to show how important you are in terms of safeguarding, because quite often it's people in those sorts of groups that will notice differences in children, or children will talk to, they might disclose to. So that's who's invited, if you like. And we did 15 sessions, and the focus was bumps and babies. So it was about babies, our safeguarding priority, and also before the baby's born, so antenatally, where we know that we've had some safeguarding child practice reviews where the sort of chaotic nature of the mother's life has meant that the child, the baby, has been at risk, and so we were looking at that as well, and how we do sort of pre-birth assessments that are effective, those sorts of things. So there were 15 sessions stretching right from how to get good quality childcare up to sort of pre-birth assessments and sort of child protection. Over 300 people attended those sessions. A lot of the sessions were oversubscribed, and so we're looking now at how we repeat them. We also filmed a lot of the sessions so that people could have access to them afterwards, and the learning from those sessions is on the Safeguarding Partnership websites, and they're the links to the pages where that learning is. And as we said, this will go out in the slides that will be either sent to your email address if you register, and I'll put the link in again in a minute, or will be on the web pages just for you to access anyway. But if you want to know more about that, then you can go to those web pages. So it was really successful, and we feel quite pleased by some of the evaluation that said that people could use what they'd learned in their practice. So that's really what we're looking for, isn't it? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That's brilliant. Okay. So we just wanted to make reference to this really, really excellent resource really around mental health. So there's a whole host of resources, and these are for adults and children, and some of these are also available to download in different languages. So that is the link, and you'll be able to click into the link obviously when you get the slides, and then be able to download all of these resources. But what I'm going to do is just go through what those resources are, because I think it's really important, especially with mental health being one of the priorities, especially with the children. So this is obviously, and these are posters, and so if you're in a workplace or wherever, you'd be able to display these. Some of these come in, I think it's up to 6 languages. I've just put 3 examples on there for you, but just to have a look at really. So that's kind of mental health, and if you've got any emergency, you know, that's who you can contact, non-urgent, urgent and emergency. And again, that's in 6 different languages. Then there's a whole lot of different booklets around kind of that neighbourhood mental health cafe. So they're drop-in cafes where you can go. And if you're struggling, and obviously people to talk to. So in that booklet there, you've got where those cafes are in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And again, there's a carers pack, so a whole resource there around if somebody is a carer, where they can get support and what different things are there for them. And then getting help, mental health and wellbeing fund as well there. So there are lots and lots of what's in your area, what's out and about. There's a QR code there, and if you scan the QR code, then you can find out what services there are across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland as well. And again, that's to provide with mental health and wellbeing. So again, posters that can be displayed in your workplace for people to access. And again, these are available in a variety of different languages. This is the other one. So we know that mental health doesn't just happen between the working hours of 9 to 5. Very often, you know, people are in crisis in the middle of the night at different times, weekends, that kind of thing. So there is a free 24-hour mental health helpline there. And again, a really good poster to have around. And that again is available in different languages. Children, so there's a really good booklet there, which is the Young Person's Guide, so about mental health and their emotional well-being. And then, hey, how are you feeling? So that's another good resource there. Again, these are around children and young people. And then there is a guide for young people. So and these are booklets. So there's lots and lots of resources throughout the booklet. This is just the front page of the booklet. But as you can see there is a guide for where the support is in Rutland, Leicestershire, and also Leicester City. So there's one for each one. So again, I think it was really useful to talk through what is in that link, because there's some really, really good resources there, I think, that people will be able to use. Okay, so we're now going to hand over to Jackie Brown, and she is the Safeguarding and Transition Lead at Rainbows Hospice, and is going to talk us through Mental Capacity Act in practice. So welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. Are you going to put me on camera, or I maybe don't need to be, do I?
Oh, can you do it? Can you put her on camera? I mean, as a presenter.
Don't worry. It's absolutely fine. So yeah, hi everyone. My name's Jackie Brown, and as Heidi said, I'm the Safeguarding and Transition Lead at Rainbows Hospice. I haven't always been in safeguarding, so I'm a neuro OT by background, with a history of working in with traumatic brain injury and severe and enduring mental health problems in adults. Are we doing Chris Whitty? Can you move the slide on?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay. So this is not going to be a repeat of all the different Mental Capacity Act training that you've been on. This is about the Mental Capacity Act in practice and Rainbow's journey to becoming 100% compliant, which is a big thing to say. And I'm here today feeling very proud, but knowing that it's been a massive team effort. So it's been everyone involved really in getting us to the stage where we feel really confident with our processes.
Sorry, I've moved that on.
No, that's fine. I'm ready.
Ready?
Yep. So just a wee bit about Rainbows. So Rainbows is the East Midlands only hospice for babies, children and young people up to the age of 25. And that's really important, I think, to stress, because people often think of Rainbows being a children's hospice. We are a children's hospice, but we're also a hospice for young adults as well. Our referral criteria is that the baby, child or young person has to have a life-limiting, life-threatening condition. And we don't just offer things that go on within the hospice itself. So we've got a really big and very experienced family support team comprising of nurses, support workers, and then the specialist roles. We've got Sharon in the audience with us today, who's our transition coordinator, but we've also got youth work, sibling support, music therapy, gosh, Sharon's probably screaming at me now, cultural support workers, so a big wider team. But essentially we are there to provide support for families, short stays, and when the time comes, end of life care. Thank you. So when we were looking at mental capacity, we were looking at a cultural shift. And compliance is the result that we've got, but it was never the aim. So whilst it's lovely to say that we're 100% compliant with the Mental Capacity Act and DoLS, the aim was always to instill the belief in staff, no matter what their role, that they are responsible for protecting and championing the rights of those we care for. It was also really important as well to validate the good practice that was going on. So we weren't compliant. 4 years ago, we were not compliant, but that did not mean to say that capacity wasn't being assessed, because it was. It was being assessed all the time in all the different practice of every member of staff. But what we weren't doing was recording it. To get a shift in the belief of staff members, we had to be mindful of the barriers. Time being a big one, and I'm sure everyone here will feel that pressure of time. 4 years ago, our capacity assessment was 8 pages long, and staff were saying they just did not have the time to be assessing on a decision-specific basis capacity when we were having to complete these 8 pages. So a lot of work went into actually looking at what is important, what is within the Act that we need to be able to provide evidence for. So we did manage to get the assessment down so that it is achievable for staff. Fear of change was always another one as well, feeling that it was yet another thing that they were being asked to do. So I think, again, going back to the fact this is not another thing you've been asked to do, you're doing this anyway. And a lack of confidence as well. So staff felt underconfident, or that it was someone else's role. However, I think it's really empowering when you sit and you talk with a healthcare assistant, for instance, and you're talking about personal care, and that is something that they are providing, and therefore, you know, they have every right and responsibility to be assessing capacity around that, and motivating staff so that they actually feel that they're part of something bigger, and then practicing with them and supporting them to do things that they thought they couldn't achieve, so it becomes habitual. And what I mean by that is now I'm not having to chase things because it's what we do. This is what we do, and the reason for that is actually partly on a video that we're going to play next, hopefully.
Okay, I shall give it a go. Can you hear it?
Yep.
I'll make it full screen.
We are all equal before the law.
Women and girls with disabilities should have the full rights and freedoms enjoyed by everyone in the community.
As children with disabilities, we have the right to express our views on matters that affect us.
We are capable and contributing members of society.
We have the right to physical access and information access.
We have that right to life. We have the right to be rescued in times of disaster.
We have the right to equal recognition before the law.
We have the right to justice. We have the right to live freely in the community, to live independently and be included.
We must not be tortured, exploited, or abused.
We have the same rights as others to choose where we live and where we travel.
We have the right to access information and to express opinions.
We have the right to privacy and to have intimate relationships.
Our children cannot be taken away just because of our disability.
We have the right to education, jobs, and healthcare.
We have the right to participate in cultural and public life.
Okay.
Thanks, Heidi. Yeah, I mean, just before we move on to our process, I think that video is so powerful, and Sharon and I do an awful lot of training around MCA, but we always show that because I think it, you know, sets the scene for what we're hoping to achieve. So moving on to Rainbow's process, we've got admissions nurses who will go out and do home visits before an admission. It was really important getting them on board so that they were able to do some preliminary work before the young person even sets foot in the building. So they will bring back information, really important information, before they come in. And first and foremost is the young person, an adult. Now, we know that the Mental Capacity Act talks about from the age of 16 up. And this is one where, and maybe some of you will think, well, we're not 100% compliant, but we concentrate from 18 up when it comes to gaining consent. We would do from the age of 16 if what the 16-year-old was saying was different to what the parent was saying. But because parents have PR, parental responsibility, up to the age of 18, we are able to take consent from them up to 18. But from 18, we no longer take consent from parents. So their admissions nurse will look at what the care needs are, likes and dislikes, really building that picture of the young person. They will do a preliminary assessment of whether or not they're able to provide informed consent for their stay and or their treatment. How do they best communicate? How do we need to be able to communicate with them when they come in? And what are the views of those who know them best? She will also explain about the Mental Capacity Act to parents. This is really crucial, especially when you've got a young person who's been with us for a number of years. They may have been coming for a number of years, but they may recently have turned 18. So Sharon in transition will work with parents to inform them about the changes in the law, but this will be reiterated by the admissions nurse because parents will no longer have forms to be filling in. Thank you, Heidi. Following that pre-admission meeting, the admission nurse will come back, and this is a laminated A4 sheet, so you've got both sides there. And these are areas of where we provide interventions at the hospice. So if you do something similar yourself, yours will look different because it will replicate the interventions that you offer. And you notice that we've got some blank boxes there because we can add in. So if there is, you know, an intervention that we're providing, and it's not on this list, then it's not an exhaustive list. I won't go all the way through it, but if you can see that, it's where we would ordinarily be asking the young person whether or not they would consent to something like having their catheter care done. Where we can't, then we're getting an indication of this is where we need to assess capacity and do things in best interest. Do you want to go on, Heidi? Yeah. So upon admission, all children and young people are allocated a nurse and a healthcare assistant. And they're all encouraged to be involved in their own admissions. So the admission process is fairly lengthy because when we are being left to look after a child or a young person and their parents are not going to be there, then we need to know we're going to get it right. All the care plans are then developed in conjunction with the child, the young person and a family member. And we'll use communication aids or different methods of communication as appropriate. And again, this is overlooked sometimes when we're looking at assessing capacity, that someone, if they're unable to, you know, verbally communicate, then there can be assumptions made that they lack capacity. So we'll spend time getting to know them. We are very lucky that a lot of our young people we've known for a number of years. So we are aware of the best way of trying to communicate. So throughout that admission process and in the development of the care plans, the Act is applied throughout. And this was a really important thing to get across to staff, is that they may have not been documenting their capacity assessments, but they have been assessing capacity all the way along. So we presume that someone has capacity until proven otherwise. We are aware whether or not there is a disturbance or impairment of mind or brain. We do look at, can the decision wait? We do look at it being decision specific, but essentially those principles of, can they understand, retain the information, weigh up and communicate, is just part of the skill of the staff working with the children and young people. So the form is not the assessment, it's the documentation. And that 8-page assessment is no longer, and we used to have a paper document which was 2 sides of A4, and the record of the mental capacity assessment was on one side and the record of the best interest decision is on the other. We have now got that embedded onto System 1, which is the electronic record system that we use, and we've got it as a questionnaire with presets, and myself and our System 1 administrator worked with the care team on a one-to-one basis or 1-to-2 basis, so that they were confident in using the system, because, as I said, one of the barriers is a lack of confidence, and certainly a lot of our clinical staff don't feel their IT skills are up to it, but actually we've got it simplified really well now, which also then means that when we're looking at the care plans, so each care plan where we've got a young person who's unable to consent to that part or element of their care, they now have a mental capacity and best interest document that aligns to that care plan. Thank you, Heidi. And where the young person has been assessed as lacking the capacity to consent to their care and treatment, and that care and treatment constitutes a deprivation, then we'll apply for an urgent DOLS application. And we'll submit the relevant mental capacity assessment along with the DOLS application. It's really, it makes good sense now to the staff. And as I say, it's become part of the culture that, you know, we're automatically thinking, are we able to do this legally? They're far more confident now with the process. And our young people can come to us up to 4 times a year for a short break. And the same process is applied. So there's still the pre-admission meeting because things change. There's still the admission process when they arrive at the hospice. I then audit the clinical record. So I audit records on a Monday and a Friday, and I look at whether or not we've got the capacity assessments in place aligning to care plans, whether or not the capacity is unchanged or whether it has changed, whether or not their care needs have changed, and we need to look at reassessing capacity for a different intervention. The care plans will document then capacity assessed and remains unchanged, continue to treat in best interest, but we don't have to go back through the process of documentation because the documentation is there and still valid. And this is just to finish off with, really, and again, it's grounded back in that safeguarding the rights of others is the most noble and beautiful end of a human being.
Okay.
Thank you. And I don't know if we have any time for any questions.
Thank you, Jackie. That was really, really useful. Yeah, thank you. Liz, do we have time? I can't see if there's any questions in the chat or comments or anything, because I'm presenting, but
yeah, we have a couple of minutes, but nobody's asked a question as yet. But Caroline England, a guest, has said that she agrees with the video had difficulties with parents preventing those rights when we try to advocate for a young person. And other people have asked for the link for the video clip. It is in the slides.
It's in the slides, yeah.
Yeah, that will be sent out.
And yes, absolutely. Just going back to the parents, and you know, we feel for parents, and I think it's important that we give them the message that they still have the right in law for consultation. So it's not that a best interest decision is automatically going to be made by the professionals, because we have to prove that we have consulted with. And then there's the part as well, isn't there, in best interest about actually documenting if there's been any disagreements. Also, a caveat just to say as well that whilst we have really slimmed down our mental capacity assessment documentation, obviously if this were to be a really serious decision that needed to be made, then it would take a lot longer, and the documentation would have to be it would have to go along with that as well. But the kind of decisions that we are assessing capacity for are pretty much the general interventions that are required for that young person during a stay.
So thank you very much, everyone. This is going to be 20 minutes talking about our Safer Sleep risk assessment tool. For those who've been to Safeguarding Matters Live before, we've talked a bit about safer sleeping. And this is a tool that we've developed collaboratively with a group of representatives of lots of different agencies and some input from parents as well. And it's been developed basically for any practitioner from any agency across LLR to be able to support them in having safer sleep conversations with families. So if you, as part of your day-to-day work, come across families with under ones, then this is for you. And the learning that has fed into this tool's development has come from reviews that have been carried out both by the Child Death Overview Panel and also by Safeguarding Partnership reviews as well, where babies have sadly died and where safer sleeping guidance was not being followed. And we want to make it really clear that you know, we can't prevent every baby death, sadly, but by being aware of the safer sleep guidance and talking with families about safer sleep practices, we can work with families to reduce risks and help every sleep for their baby to be a safer sleep. So it's really important that the information we give is consistent, and everything in this tool builds on and is consistent with all the information that the health visitors and midwives are giving to families both before and after a baby is born. I just want to acknowledge the tool that was developed by Nottingham, which we've built on and expanded and made sort of tailored to our Leicester population and Leicestershire population in all of this, which has been used with our permission. Next slide, please.
It's not moving. I don't know why.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Oh, sorry, it's got lots of clicks on this slide and things
then.
like that. No, it's right. So the safest place for any baby to sleep, this is the bottom line, the safest place from evidence is that a baby should be on their back with their feet to the foot of a cot in a cot or Moses basket in the same room as their parent or carer for the first 6 months. If you click again, however, we know that babies don't read the rule books and babies are complicated. We know that family life is complicated and the way that parents and carers make their decisions is also quite complex. So babies fall asleep in all kinds of different places. So how do we make this advice and this guidance relevant to different families and their situations? So the Lullaby Trust guidance is that they've distilled it right down to the ABC of safer sleep. So babies should always sleep on their back in a clear cot or sleep space. So moving away from just talking about Moses baskets and thinking about sleep spaces generally. So the ABC of safer sleep is something that we use a lot. Next slide, please. So babies should look like this. Parents, families are saturated with images, particularly on social media, of very cute babies, all sort of tucked up, curled up in these beautiful little pictures. And there is a lot of messaging out there, a lot of it very visual, about what looks very cute, what looks very nurturing, and a lot of it is not in adherence to the guidance. So it's sort of recognising this is what families are being fed a lot all the time around them. Next slide, please. So we've based our risk assessment tool on the assessment framework. So hopefully this looks familiar to a lot of people. So we have the child at the centre and thinking about child factors, which can increase the risk for babies, factors in parenting capacity, which can raise risks, and factors in the family and social environment. And when we come onto the tool, you'll hopefully see this sort of mapped on to the tool that we've developed. Next slide, please. The key message we want to get across is that safer sleeping is everyone's business. And we know from the evidence that families listen to people they trust. And if your agency already has that trusted relationship with a family, actually you may be in a really good position to be having conversations about a safer sleep that the families might find very difficult to have with a new professional coming in for the first time, whether that's a health visitor or the first time they're meeting a midwife, to allow families just to be completely open and honest about how they're caring for their baby, the challenges they're facing, so that we can ensure that they've got the information that they need to make things safer. So for every baby, we wanted to encourage people to be having curious conversations, want to be advocating for safer sleep for every sleep, not just at night times. We're aware that out of routine times are a particular window of vulnerability for safe sleep guidance that is being followed to suddenly not be followed. So helping families think ahead and plan ahead for those sorts of situations, whether that's planned and a positive event or whether it's unplanned and potentially a negative event or emergency situation, like, for example, fleeing domestic violence. Consistent messaging is absolutely key. So we want to make sure that everyone is giving the same messages to families. and thinking family, thinking that wider family network, not just the mother, but dad as well, other carers who are around, grandparents, those wider family networks. And all of this around Safer Sleep needs to be embedded in support for broader family risks and vulnerabilities, because we see these associations of vulnerabilities, particularly in our case learning. So it's really important that it goes alongside breastfeeding promotion and support, things like smoking cessation, housing issues, making sure families got enough space in their house for the baby to have their own safe sleep space. Concerned around alcohol use, substance misuse, parental mental health difficulties, and domestic abuse support. So it's part of this wider package of support. Next slide, please. So this tool has been developed to support any practitioner from any agency to have those conversations with families about safer sleeping. So it should have all the information in there. We've tried to put lots in there for background information, tips, tricks, ideas, thoughts for how to start conversations, and documents that you can complete with the family, leave with the family, and things you can give to the family for them to develop their own plans. And really it's about supporting families to make informed choices and plan ahead for safer infant sleeping. Also using this to recognise and capture those vulnerabilities that might be there in the family, and to help inform the support they might need. This has been a very collaborative piece of work, so we've had lots of representation from different people within health, early help, children's and families wellbeing service, social care. We've had Turning Point involved, and public health as well, and then we've had input and feedback from our families as well, which has been really helpful for us to tweak some of the wording to make sure that what we're doing is really acceptable and accessible for families. On every slide for the rest of the presentation, you will find the web links. So it is on both the City and the County and Rutland Safeguarding Partnership Board web pages. And if you go on to the next slide, please. If you click on either of those links, it will take you to a web page that looks something like this. So this is the county one, the city one is very similar. And it has on there the Safer Sleep Risk Assessment Tool, the full document, which is a 7-page PDF. It also has a single-page PDF, which is the risk assessment based around that assessment triangle. It has a 1-page safer sleeping plan, which is for families to have and complete. It then further down the page has those key safe sleep messages. It's got an embedded animation from the Lullaby Trust that you can sit and watch with families. It's got links to all the Lullaby Trust information in other languages if you're working with a family whose first language isn't English. And then further down the bottom of that page are lots of links for those additional support resources around other vulnerabilities. So that is all there in a kind of one-stop shop of information for practitioners to go to. And as I've said, the links are on every single slide going forward. So I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who is going to talk through the tool sort of section by section, page by page, and show you what it has.
Thanks very much, Susie. I've only got one screen, so I'm having to call out for the next slide. The next slide is slide 8. Could I have slide 8, Heidi, please?
Is this it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't see what you're sharing. I can only see what I've got, but it's 8 and I'll keep on going. So what Susie has put a lot of work into this, and what she's done is split each of the pages. You can see a miniature of the page over there on the left, page 1, and she's done the top and the bottom so that everybody looking at the slides can see visually what the sort of stuff the practitioners can use to support the families. And Susie and I actually had a chat this morning, and one of the things we were saying is, yes, it's everybody's business, and also those contextualized situations, and the fact that many people in different agencies have been working families with for some time. They may get disclosures, or they may get concerns that, say, a midwife or a health visitor doesn't get. So you know, it is really important that it is everybody's business, and we can make sleep as safe as possible. So that's the top of page 1, and explains the background and the reason why the tool was established. Next slide, please. And at the bottom of page 1, thanks. Have you got a lady looking into a cot? Yes.
Yep.
Looks like a travel cot, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one is information to support practitioners. So it goes through the Lullaby Trust, the ABC of safer sleep again, and things for parents and carers to avoid. So you can see there, for example, not using a hot water bottle, and you can see in the cot that you've got there, there's nothing surrounding the baby. The feet are to the bottom of the cot. There's no cot bumpers, no cuddly toys, and no bedding. And I think a lot of parents are now using those sort of sleeping bags that fit with little clips over the shoulders, so there's no loose bedding. Next slide, please. So this is the top of page 2, and it's the Safe Sleeping Risk Assessment tool, and it's babies under 12 months. So the risks of being out of routine, and one of the things that Susie mentioned was maybe suddenly having to leave the household due to domestic violence. In the National Review of Sudden Infant Deaths, particularly where vulnerable families were involved, they found that when families were out of their usual routine for any reason, following safer sleep guidance can be affected and put babies at greater risk. So supporting families to think and plan ahead for those times when they might be out of their usual routine, so they might be staying with a relative or a friend, might help reduce the risk. So sort of talking through that. I don't know if they have to go and stay at their sister's, or they know that it's Christmas time and there might be a party. I work with Susie in CDOP, and some of the cases we've seen, it has been an out of routine situation where things have changed and the baby wasn't in, or the young baby wasn't in their usual place of sleeping. It's worth noting in terms of safer sleep and the law that people need to be aware. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily talk about this to everybody, but there is a risk of criminal prosecution for families in certain circumstances. So if someone shares a sleep space with a child while they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol and causes the death of that child, they could be liable to criminal prosecution. So obviously that could involve where you're being told that a partner or the person themselves maybe, you know, has a drink every night or whatever and is sleeping with the baby. Next slide, please. So now that's the bottom of page 2. So the information on here is local learning from our own Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland's child death reviews, and about the associated risk factors that we've identified locally. So obviously the cases are small, but every case is an absolute tragedy. But when we're looking at Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland from 2018 to 2022, it was co-sleeping with an adult in a chair or a sofa, babies that were preterm more than 3 weeks early or before 37 weeks gestation, low birth weight babies, the parents smoking, sharing the sleep space with an adult who'd been under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Sorry, is somebody wanting to say something? I just got a bit background noise, but do shout up if I need to. Yeah. Crowded or cluttered housing, and previous or current domestic abuse, and families being out of their usual routine, which we've just mentioned. So it is useful for you to know what our local issues are. Next slide, please. So this is the top of page 3, and it's the Safer Sleep Risk Assessment. And it's available on the web page to print out as a single page, so that you can sit with the families and do that with them and leave a copy for the family, and also keep a copy yourself. So we're back to the assessment triangle with the parenting capacity of the child and the environment. And it's a way of capturing vulnerabilities and identifying issues that families might need support with. So the tool should help identify risks and having a discussion about how to reduce the risks. What it doesn't mean is that the more boxes that are ticked, the more likely it is that that baby's going to come to harm. That's not the idea. It's the idea to talk about the risks. It's not saying, well, if you've got 7 of these, then your baby's more at risk. But we do know that there are overlapping vulnerabilities. The risks are small. This is about making it as safe a sleep as possible, and looking at what can be done and what can be adapted, and contextualizing what you're doing. Okay. Next slide, please.
Sorry, it's not moving again. Hang on. It seems to throw.
Mine isn't moving either, so that's
it's
fun,
gone. It's gone. It's gone.
It's gone through. Okay, so then you can see at the bottom of page 3 and the top where all the boxes were is miniaturized there, that actually you do that with the parent, and you talk about the risks that you've identified and what actions. So you've got the discussion on the left there, and then the actions on the right hand side, and then what actions you've agreed when you've completed it, and the actions that the practitioner might be doing. It could be a referral for further support, you know, smoking cessation, something like that. And then when you're going to review review the process as well, because it's not static, something could be moving. So then there's a remember down there about keeping a copy. Okay, next slide, please. Is that all right if you've got the top of page 4? Is that all right, Heidi?
Yep, it's on. Yep.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So the next page is for after the risk assessment has been completed and the risks have been identified, with suggested next steps, including checking the family knowledge and their understanding of the Safer Sleep guidance, and ensuring that the family have information in their first language. So that's links to the Lullaby Trust resources. You know, there's the simple versions as well, and considering other resources and services that might support the family. And, you know, it could be that, you know, as a practitioner, you're very concerned about what you've seen, or you're concerned about some of the things that you've heard, or maybe a carer that's looking after the baby, escalating any of those concerns, including links to the neglect toolkit. Next slide, please.
Yep, it's there.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. So this is a list of the additional resources shown here, and firstly, those are a lot of the Lullaby Trust sources there, and they're also available on the web page. So what we're trying to do is maximize access to all of these resources and maximize those to the families that you work with. So you can see we've got our local substance misuse service, we've got smoking cessation, domestic abuse, as well as all the Lullaby Trust resources and the videos and the easy read card. Next slide, please.
Yep, so.
Thank you very much. So now we're on the top of page 5. So again, it's information to support practitioners, and it's about starting those conversations. I'm sure that everybody is very skilled with these sorts of conversations, but sometimes when it comes to safe sleep and sensitive issues, it's quite nice to have a few things you know, in your toolbox, really, to be able to talk about. So, for example, who else looks after your baby? Do they know about safer sleeping advice and how to keep the baby safe? And we do know that it takes time for information to filter through, and maybe there's a dominant matriarch in the family, or even a patriarch or a sister that has different views and says, oh, this is what I did and I was fine. So it's about saying, you know, what the latest evidence is and how you might be able to put that across, or whether it's the best decision to use certain people to look after your baby. Do you feel that person's safe? Do you feel that they understand what it is that you're saying? And it's just starters and questions just to open up those discussions and prompt some planning and prompt them to consider how they might plan to make things safer. So going to a friend's for a drink, using a babysitter, you know, where do babies go to sleep? Where do they wake up? That kind of thing. Next slide, please.
That's up.
Thank you. So at the bottom of the page, it's more information to support practitioners, chat tips, Lullaby Trust animations and the easy read card, and planning the next conversations. And then there's the Safer Sleep plan. So there's quite a lot there. Questions to start a conversation. If I'm cuddling my baby and I feel tired, do I have a safe place ready to put them down? So those are quite nice. They're quite gentle questions. If I have to leave home in a hurry. So the practitioner that's working with the family may well know that there's a history of domestic abuse, or may know that the housing isn't that stable. So you'll kind of start conversations depending on the circumstances that you're working with. But I think those are hopefully helpful. And as we've said, parents and carers have been involved in the development of this tool. So hopefully the language is accessible for people. Slide 18, the next slide, please.
Yep.
Thank you. So here's the baby safe sleep plan with the baby's name and the parent carer name. So it's the document for the families to keep. So they have for them to complete with you, and it reminds them what's to be done to make the sleep time safer, and key reminders about sharing sleep space. So things I can do to make my sleep time safer at every sleep. the wording there, again, it's been spoken to with carers and families. A lot of people, you know, do like toys and all the rest of it, but there it's saying loose bedding. It talks about not sleeping in a chair or a sofa, and then sharing a sleep space. So we're trying to be realistic. Some people will sleep with their baby, and it's looking at reducing the risks and making it as safe as possible. You're not going to get everybody, and nobody would want to enforce people to do anything, and it's having those open conversations and not making people feel that they're being judged or being dictated to, if you like, but you're actually having those conversations and explaining the reasons, because I think we all would agree that everybody really wants the best for their babies. Most people want the best for their babies. Okay, next slide, please.
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So at the bottom of the page, there's space for the families to jot down their own individual thoughts, ideas and plans, particularly thinking ahead for times when they might be out of their usual routine or if their baby won't settle. So again, it's prompting the families to think who else might look after the baby and who they might need to share the plan with. And if you look down bottom right hand corner there, there's a QR code which links to the Health for Under 5's website and to Crisis, managing the babies crying, and other resources. And because I always promote ICON, which is to reduce abusive head trauma in babies triggered by crying, then I know that on the Under 5's website there's links to ICON and the resources in ICON as well. So it's looking at the individual child and that individual parent or carer working out how they would do things and what supports they might need. Next slide, please. So we've still got the links there, thanks Heidi, and we've got the working group and everybody named in the working group, and so many people have worked to bring this together. So we're acknowledging Nottingham and Nottinghamshire because the tool is based on them and then developed for our local area, and all the parent groups who reviewed and gave feedback on the tool, etc. And the final slide, please. So this is the list of resources and where to find out more information. So the Lullaby Trust, which we've mentioned before, the sleep advice, alcohol consumption and supervision. So the Who in Charge videos. So these are really good videos. I think the Who's in Charge was developed in Birmingham. Yes, I can see it's Birmingham community. They're really good. They're really accessible. And it's looking at what can happen when parents may be drinking and it's not clear who's in charge of the children. Children are wandering off and things. The Lift the Baby is very good. I mean, we're doing an ICON video here in Leicester and Rutland, but this Lift the Baby is very health orientated, as in it's promoting the baby is a rugby ball. I'm not doing this very well. What I would advise is they're short and sharp, and they're actually very much involving men. So this one from Berkshire has got the baby as a rugby ball and men moving this baby around. So I think it's a good way of getting a message across that's quite accessible, and it's hopefully sort of targeted a bit more at men there. And then there's the NICE guidance. There's support for getting baby equipment. So again, looking at a sleep space, there may be a need to get some equipment. I mean, hopefully antenatally rather than postnatally, and then a link to the safeguarding procedures. So thank you for looking at this presentation. Hopefully that's going to be shared with your agency. There are also going to be, if you're interested in linking more with this particular subject, can you send your email to the board office? There are going to be bi-monthly sessions where people can ask questions, because we want to disseminate this information as far as we possibly can.
There are a couple of questions. There's, is it in the Child Red book?
So this particular risk assessment is not in the child's red book. So for those who, I'm sure a lot of people know, so the red book is the parent's handheld record. So what is in the red book is a safer sleeping checklist that the health visitors will complete with the family. So that is in there, and there is also a one-page guide for families around safer sleeping that is in the red book. This document itself sits on the partnership board websites. So it's for use with whichever families you feel you want to use it with. We've not managed to fit it into the red book because it's a lot of information to condense down. And actually, this risk assessment tool is to support professionals rather than being information for families, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And then somebody's asked whether it's available in other languages.
Yeah, so this is something that we are very aware of, that obviously we live and our communities are very diverse, and there are lots of languages spoken in our communities. The risk kind of comes back to what I was saying just now, that the tool is developed for practitioners. So the tool itself and all that information is in English, but the information for families that is out there, we've put the links to the Lullaby Trust, who do have information in lots of other languages which you can access via their website. So the idea would be that for those conversations that practitioners are having with families, that they would use whatever services they use in terms of interpreters in those conversations. But the risk assessment tool is a tool for professionals, practitioners, so that is in English at the moment.
Great, thanks. There's one final question which I will ask, because is this advice given by midwives, so before the baby arrives, so parents are aware when buying things?
Yes, so safer sleeping advice starts during pregnancy with the midwives. Give a lot of information, a lot of signposting, a lot of information pointing people against the Lullaby Trust websites. That is continued by health visiting, and we've had lots of input from those teams in developing this tool, because the idea of this is it builds on everything that they are doing. So they will come and bring their universal messages to all families, and then this is additional messaging for families to support that. And to go alongside that.
Thank you.
And I think just to add to that, although that information is given, you know, again, people who are maybe going into the household more often or not seeing the parents in clinic might have more access to see what the environment is like. So we can't always control what parents buy or what people gift to people. You know, that might not be the ideal items, and also in some cases the parents or carers are reluctant to actually let the midwives or health visitors see the sleep area. Now, they do ask to see the sleep area, but we can't enforce that. And in a way, for people who are working more closely or have that trusted relationship, that's another. It sounds a bit like policing, and it's not meant to be that, but it's really helpful if we can see the sleep space and give some advice, or maybe then go to charities to get some help to support people. So yes, consistent messages are given, but we, you know, it's not always possible to be able to, you know, make everything as safe as possible, and that's what we're trying to do.
And the other thing, sorry, I'm aware time is marching on, I'll be really quick, is that situations change over time. So midwives and health visitors will have contacts at specific points with families, and a lot can change over a short space of time. People buy in new stuff, suddenly something really stressful happens with the family, situations can change and deteriorate. And if your agency is actually, or you know, you're involved on a more long-term basis with the family, you may notice those changes that happen as and when they happen, which might sort of it's where this tool then sort of hopefully will come into its own to provide you with this sort of support and information to have conversations as you see things change.
Thank you.
The next speaker is David O'Hanlon-Ribbons, who's from the Violence Reduction Network, and I think he's going to talk about some of their role in the serious violence duty and how that links into safeguarding. So I'll let you go ahead, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Heidi. It's an absolute delight to be here in a meeting that's so well attended. Fantastic to be part of this. So my name is David Ribbins. I am the Children and Families Lead for the Violence Reduction Network. You can see our website address on the bottom of that very first slide. My contact details appear on the very last slide. So if there's anything that I'm going through today that resonates or you want me to unpack at a less of a gallop, then please do get in touch with us. I will be talking about the serious violence duty, but I'll also be talking about how the VRN works, and perhaps I need to do that now. Very aware of the fact that a lot of you are already fully on board and engaged with the VRN, but in case you're not, just explain what's happening here. What's happened is that the Home Office have obviously generated a wealth of data. Leicester does sit as one of the hotspots nationally for violent crime, which is a very sad statistic, but it is there. So what has happened is the Home Office have directly devolved a chunk of money to the police and crime commissioners in those hotspot areas. Other hotspot areas that you can probably guess. So you've got Merseyside, you'll have London, West Midlands, specifically Birmingham, and yes, Leicester. We're right in there. The reason I'm going through that is it explains that actually we have been in a good position for the serious violence duty. And if we could go into the next slide, that would be tremendous. The serious violence duty came out in January. If you just tap away, please, so we can just fill the slide. There's a whole bunch in there. I'll tell you when to stop if that's okay. And there's a little bit more, probably one more. That's perfect. Thanks ever so much. So yes, when the duty came out in January of 2023, neighbouring authorities, so for example, Northamptonshire, that don't have a VRN or a VRU unit, clearly had to do an awful lot of work. The serious violence duty, as I said, it came out in January 2023. The timelines are important because we've got until January 2024 to start to make progress and evidence our work through collaboration against a definition, which I'll go through in a minute. Essentially, I won't go into the minutiae and the details of the serious violence duty, but just to basically say that there are specified authorities, and you can see those in the purple bubbles, and relevant authorities, and you can see those in the sort of lime-coloured bubbles. If you are part of Integrated Care Board or health or local authorities, you will have already received briefings and presentations from the VRN earlier this year. But if there's anything that you want us to go over again, do please come back to us, use the website or use my contacts. Bottom right-hand corner of this screen, there's a little target and above it, it says success measures. This is what we're expected to start to evidence from January 2024 onwards. A reduction in hospital admissions for assaults with a knife or sharp object, a reduction in knife and sharp object enabled serious violence recorded by the police, because sometimes those are two different data sets, and then finally a reduction in homicides recorded by the police. Those are the success measures. Early indications are that we are on track. So that is good news, and we celebrate that. So if we can go to the next slide, what I'm going to do, and again, if we could just tap away to fill those two boxes, I think there's 4 bullet points. That's perfect. Thank you so much. In terms of education specifically, what's included in the definition of an educational authority appears there. So it's governing bodies of maintained schools, further education colleges, sixth form colleges, and so on. Management committees of PRUs, which we have in the city, of course. Proprietors of academy schools, free schools, APs or alternative provision academies, and non-maintained special schools, proprietors of independent schools. And clearly we've got all of those across our region. We have, at my last count, 602 different schools across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So we're a sizable entity. There is a query there and there is an omission, and I don't have the answer for this. You'll notice that nurseries don't appear. So what we have done is we've gone back to the Home Office and asked for some clarity on that. I suspect the answer will be that the serious violence duty is pertinent and relevant for institutions providing an education for children of a compulsory school age. I suspect that's what they'll come back with. But until that appears, that's what we're going to work with. So if we look on the next slide around the serious violence duty, you'll see what the requirements are, and there should be 4 bullet points that pop up. Now, the reason I went into a little bit of detail about what the VRN is all about and the fact that we exist, it actually means that we're in a good place. So the first of the 4 points that we are required to do as an authority is to define serious violence. And I'm going to do that. And I think I've got it on the next slide. We'll do that in a little minute. The second one is very easy for us, which is to agree the geographical area and partnership model. Well, we are Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So that was very simple for us. For massive cities like London, for example, that's much more difficult. But for us, we're working with Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, clearly, to understand local issues and produce a strategic needs assessment. Again, reasonably straightforward for us, really, because the VRN have been producing SNAs for the last 2 years. So we've just had to refresh and update what we're all about. That is going to be available through the usual routes and channels of communication and via our website. And then clearly the fourth one will be to prepare, publish and implement that strategy. Well, it's going to be, if not already, signed off by the Strategic Partnership Board exec. So again, we're in a good place. Now, if you go on to the next slide, if we could please, Heidi, or whoever's being ever so kind and bumping us along.
Yes,
I did want to go. Thanks, Heidi.
No worries.
That's marvellous. So this is the definition, and I wanted to unpack this with you. The serious violence duty was really quite, what's the phrase I can use, bogged down in the Houses down in Parliament because of this, because of the definition. What they have agreed is that they were not going to dictate a national definition of serious violence, but leave it to regions, but told us what had to be included. And the two things I really want to draw your attention to are the inclusion of sexual violence in that first sentence, and in the second sentence, domestic or public places. And I just need to take a step away and explain why that's so significant. It is significant because historically, neither sexual or domestic violence ever appeared in nationally agreed duties, which is beggars belief, really, and neither did domestic residences. It was all about violence, not domestic abuse or sexual violence, and public places, not domestic residences again, which was really very odd. I celebrate this definition. This has been accepted across the partnership fully, but there is a caveat. There is a little warning here. When we are now moving forwards, comparing historical data, because this definition has changed, which is a good thing, it is difficult to compare with accuracy and precision data over the longer term, if that makes some sort of sense, because this definition is so difficult, and so not so difficult, but so different from what we've had historically. Okay, I want to be a little bit more granular and start to link in how different inspectorates, whether it's HMI, CFRS for the police and the fire and rescue service, or CQC for health. And in the next example on the next slide, please, Heidi, I've tried to be a little bit more forensic about what it's actually meaning on the ground into our individual settings. Now, we've had 8 or 9 different schools across our region who've had inspections either in the summer term or in this autumn term. And the same questions keep coming up time and time again. And I think it's worth thinking about this with J-ties and so on the horizon. So the 2 questions that I've had reported back to me, as I said, 7 or 8 times from primary and secondary schools, are these 2 questions highlighted and emboldened here in green. Who do you collaborate with to prevent your students or young people from being involved in violent crime? And then the supplementary question is, who do you collaborate with to manage students who've been affected by violent crime? So there's clearly down at the government level, departmental level, some joined up synergy and some joined up thinking, which we'll always celebrate. This, I think, is really, really relevant and interesting. These 2 questions appear under the safeguarding umbrella of school inspections. And as we know, that's one of the very first things that inspectors will look at. But it goes to show the importance of the serious violence duty on individual settings across the sector. Really important, I think, also to flag up the fact that there is clearly a thread of joined up working at departmental level at the in government, central government, because I suspect that other inspectorates, whether it's fire and rescue, the police, or in health, these sorts of questions will be asked as well. So I wanted to flag that up because I think that's key. When I've put this slide in front of principals and head teachers, they sit up immediately because it rather gathers their attention. Now, clearly, we don't run schools for Ofsted, we don't have a health service for CQC, but we would a little bit daft not to consider this. At the end of the day, it's just really good practice. Thank you, Heidi. If we could just bump along to the next slide, that'd be wonderful. And one more tap, and I think we should have a whole bunch of purple boxes popping up here. That's absolutely marvelous. Thank you. On this slide, what I'm trying to do is to say we're not reinventing the wheel. These are some of the things that education partners already do to contribute to violence prevention and reduction. These things are already in place. As an ex-head teacher myself, it's inordinately frustrating when you're asked a question, you have got the answers, but you can't remember the answers. Well, they're here. And I take you back to the notion of being in January 2024, where we're asked, what are we doing in health, in education at local authority level to implement the serious violence duty? Where's your evidence that it's actually having an impact? Well, these are the sorts of areas that we need to go to and to reference. Now, I'm going to take a pause there, and I'm going to go all teachery. I'm going to ask you a question, and not ask you to put your hands up or to shout out, because that would be a bit awkward. But in the chat, I'm going to ask you to put something in for me, because I'm going to ask a question before I go to the next slide, which is a very data-rich slide. So I'm not going to go there just yet. What we have to do, I think, and the VRN are well placed to do this, is to address what we think our young people are facing out and about, as opposed to what they are facing out and about. So I'm going to focus in on one question. If we think of 100% of violent crime across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, the question is this: what percentage do you think involves a knife? And yes, the media play a part. So I'm just inviting you here for a little bit of, it's not fun, but out of interest, just pop into the chat. What percentage of 100% of violent crime across our region involves a knife? I'm going to just leave that for a second and let people just pop things in the chat. $85, $56, $44, $80, $77. Yeah, it's really pretty high. If we can bump over Heidi onto the next slide, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much, folks, for joining with that. Okay, the answer basically is typically around 5 to 8%. 5 to 8% of offences involves a knife or sharp object. That is, it's staggering, really, and I need to really unpack that. There's a huge amount of data on this slide, I'm aware of that, but I just want to really focus your attention on some headlines and highlights. I mentioned a minute or two ago about the fact that we need to move away from what we think is happening to what is actually happening out on the streets. And I think that knife statistic is quite shocking. 5% is still too high. 1% is too high. We don't want any, but it clearly shows the role of the media in terms of whipping up and centering people's attention on certain types of violent crime. A lot of the schools that I work with will do a lot of work, as will the police, around prevention of violence and then go by default to knife crime. What I'm suggesting is a little bit of thought provocation perhaps here. Perhaps we need to think again about where are we focusing our interventions? Where are we focusing our education? Because this data that you see on this slide, and there's way too much of it, I appreciate, is all about Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland violent crime. It's really, really, really very different from what we think. So top left-hand side, you've got the extent of the violent crime, and I've just plucked out the knife stat. Top right-hand side of this very, very busy slide is person profiles, and you can see that 71% of offenders of violent crime are male. 56% of victims are female, and that includes obviously domestic abuse and sexual violence. 1.7%, top right-hand corner, the very top right-hand corner, another very significant statistic. 1.7% of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland residents were a victim, and 1.2% were perpetrators of violence crime in the last 12 months. Again, that is a statistic that I think a lot of people will be surprised to read, because I think we're led to believe it'll be much higher than that. So that information is there for you to have a good look at. Bottom left-hand side, I will just pluck out one more statistic that will be of interest in terms of timings. The peak times for violent crime, as you can see there, tends to be between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is basically school throwing out time. That is, there's a briefing on the VRN website about what we can do to address that. So do please familiarize yourself with that. That's a peak time. And then the rest of it, we can sort of guess. It's linked to NTE, the nighttime economy, and alcohol plays a really big part in that. No surprises there. too much information for me to go through there. So I know these slides are going out to you. Please do have a good trawl through those and then contact me if there are any questions that you want me to unpack for your setting. My email address is right at the very, very end. The question that just popped up in the chat, I'll try and do that now. Is that 5% across LLR or is it national statistic? It's a LLR statistic. This is all to do with Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So I hope that's of interest. On the next slide, Heidi, if we may be able to just bump along. These are all the risk factors, and what we've tried to do on the right-hand side is to break them down into Rutland, Leicestershire, and Leicester, so you can look at those. What's fascinating in my job is that I'm very fortunate that I occasionally get to go into HMP Stockton and work with some prisoners directly there. And it's interesting that without exception, the prisoners that I work with have all had a fixed term or permanent exclusion, have all had special educational needs, were severely or persistently absent. All of these things we can predict. All of those things are, again, it's part of the VRN mantra. If it's predictable, it's preventable. And you can see there also on the right-hand side that the particular mentions of alcohol abuse and drug abuse, etc., etc. I see somebody's just popped a hand up. Happy to take a question. Well, the hand's just gone down again. Hand's gone down again. Okay, I'll plow on. If we can go to the next slide, please, Heidi. I'm mindful of the fact that we are running up against time. That's fantastic. So what we're trying to say, and I love this little quote, is that we need to stop just pulling people out of the water. Some of us need to go upstream and find a way to find out why they're falling in. I love the mantra, I think it was the head teacher, Matt Nicol, over at Redmoor in Hinckley, the secondary school over there. And he was talking about one of our interventions, which I'll go through in a minute, that instead of mopping the floor, what we need to do is to turn off the tap. And I think that's a lovely way of looking at it. If we can see what is actually happening on our streets that our young people are facing on a daily basis, then we're better informed to actually put something in place to address it in the first place. So if we could go on to the next slide, what we're going to do now is to start talking about prevention, which is where we really, really, really need to have a look. I need to make reference to two resources. On our website, you will find that there is a school handbook. It says secondary handbook, but it's equally relevant to primary as well. And there's also something called the Live Safe website, which is for practitioners, for parents, and professionals as well. So the handbook on the VRN website, please have a look and reference it. And the Live Safe website, it's there for everybody to have a look at. Our data sets tell us, and I just want to go into this in a little bit of detail, that the 15 to 19-year-old age range for our younger people, that is our number one group of concern in terms of perpetrators, suspect offenders, and victimization. So that's the 15 to 19 age range. But what we are seeing in our region is the 10 to 14 age range are catching them up, both in victimization and perpetration of violent crime. So that tells me that we really do need to intervene far earlier than we currently are, and to put early help in earlier and quicker than we do. So one of our interventions is this one that you can see on the screen, our logo, which is the MVP, Mentors in Violence Prevention. This is specifically for schools, but we are trialing MVP into other settings, not least prisons and into the community. We're in a process of evaluating the impact of MVP in, I think we've got 42 Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland schools engaged in the programme. We've just had 14 primary schools staff members trained in this programme as well, because of what I've just said about that 10 to 14 age range. Really, really important that we do get in there early. MVP is basically a peer mentoring programme where older children deliver key messages to younger children as part of the curriculum diet. And this is absolutely a fantastic program. We're really keen to push this through once we've finished our program of evaluation, which would hopefully have completed by spring. On the next slide, Heidi, if it's possible, I just wanted to flag up these trauma-informed consortium groups. My colleague Laura Sharman And also colleagues like Lorna McLean are doing some fantastic work across the region. And I would strongly urge all of us to look at the resources that are out there already. I don't think we need to be doing anything more. I think we just need to coordinate what we've got, because of the nature of the resources that are out there are of super quality. I can see a couple of questions about MVP coming up in a minute. I have got a list of the schools that are involved, but if you can contact me separately, I can let you have some indication of that. And I think if we go to the next and last slide, Heidi, what I wanted to do was to also ask colleagues just to flag up and open an invitation to you, really, that every half term I've put together a VRN education network. The next meeting is Friday, the 12th of January, and half of that meeting is always given to a data update. That's, again, what you've just seen, but in a less of a galloped pace, more of a glacial approach to really understanding what's going on out there. So Friday, the 12th of January via Teams, that's the next VRN education network meeting. It runs from 3:30 to 4:30, 4:45, depending on questions. And I'm aware of the fact that I've just sat here and spoken to you and at you solidly for 20 odd minutes or so. So I'll stop there because I can see there's some questions coming through, but I'm happy to take any other verbal or chat-based questions.
Thank you. That was great. Liz, have we got the questions from the chat?
Yeah, so there's one about running it in probation. I think that's the MV Mentors in Violence Prevention, but I'm guessing it's children's, not probation, which would be adults. Am I right?
My hope, Liz, would be that we can get MVP adopted at local authority level and be part of the school offer as part of their PSHE or citizenship or character education, part of our staple diet, really. I would say for now, I would like to have some conversations about moving this into the Youth Justice Service, but we're doing the evaluation first. We need to make sure that it is having the impact that we all can predict it's having, and then we'll be looking to expand it into different sectors.
Okay, thanks. I don't think there's anything else. There's the youth offending team that are saying in Leicester, please, they'd like to talk to you. And people that are interested, which we could pass your details on to. I think that's interesting in the group.
They're on the slide, yeah, for people to get in touch, aren't they?
Yeah,
please do.
Yeah, brilliant. That's it. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Yeah, informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
okay,
David.
Right. So, yep. So, like I say, David's email address is there on the slide. So when you get access to the slides, you'll be able to contact David directly. Okay, so we're going to move into our next part, and this is kind of the safeguarding adult reviews, but from other areas. And I'm going to hand you over to Joe, who is going to take you through the Rochdale and Joshua from Adult H from Rochdale and Joshua from Lewisham case.
Thanks, Heidi. So I'll try and keep this as brief as I can within 10 minutes. So these are two safeguarding adults reviews from other areas, which the Leicester review subgroup has looked at. So within the subgroup, we sometimes look at learning from other areas rather than just limiting it to sort of Leicester City. And in this case, we looked at Adult H, who was a Zimbabwean man who came to the UK in 2005. He was refused indefinitely to remain and classed as an overstayer, and he was HIV positive. And unfortunately, his condition wasn't being medically controlled. And then we have Joshua from Lewisham, who was a Black Caribbean man of a Guyanese background who came to the UK as a child. And he had long-standing mental health conditions and was living in supported accommodation. So Joshua was quite a high-profile case nationally that was in the papers and whatnot. So we've got links to both reports and publication statement for both of these. Next slide, please.
Yeah, it's doing the frozen thing again. Oh, there you go.
So I'll start with Joshua. So race equality is a central feature of this safeguarding adults review. So Joshua had 9 admissions to hospital under the Mental Health Act. and was subject to Section 117 aftercare, and he lived in supported accommodation as part of the aftercare. And on the day that the incident happened, he was seen by supported living staff on the street at different times, but then they were unable to locate him. So they escalated their concerns and they called the police. And then a member of the public called the police after a man, which was Joshua, was seen climbing onto school fields. And the police came and requested an ambulance. The ambulance arrived and ambulance service staff saw Joshua and was being restrained on the floor with up to 9 officers involved in restraining him, and was in a recovery position. And it wasn't known for how long he'd been restrained. Next slide, please. The ambulance service officer unfortunately didn't conduct a thorough medical examination, and he left the police officer to walk Joshua to the ambulance. And at this point, his hands were still cuffed behind his back and his leg restraints were on. His hood was up, which meant that no one could properly conduct medical observations of his well-being. When he was put into the ambulance, it was found that he was in cardiac arrest. He still had his handcuffs on, and they started CPR. He was conveyed to hospital, and they continued with the CPR, but he was declared deceased at the hospital. And there was a coroner's inquest where the jury found that there were system-wide failures. There was a Regulation 28 report, which is issued by the coroner to prevent further harm. And there were findings there for the Met and the London Ambulance Service. And they've got the medical cause of death, acute behavioural disturbance leading to exhaustion and cardiac arrest, contributed to by restraint struggle and being walked. Next slide, please. And the learning that came out in this case was his care plan was lacking in the wider context of his identity, and his mental health issue needed to be understood within the context of race, family, cultural and other relevant factors. And the importance of reviewing the Section 136 mental health pathway and the care planning process in general, looking at managing people's deterioration in their mental health and crisis situations. That Section 136 being a power of last resort to be used by the police, and wanting agencies to develop their contingency plans and services to support adults when they're in mental health crisis. Use of force training should be focused on prevention and de-escalation. Reviewing training and guidance in line with position statements by the Royal College of Psychiatrists on acute behavioural disturbance and excited delirium, and then relevant training to be reviewed and policies strengthened regarding anti-racist perspectives, including involvement of people with lived experience and their families and third sector organisations, and that training should be part of a wider programme of change. Next slide, please. Okay. And so on to Adult H from Rochdale. And Adult H was a Zimbabwean man, again, who came to the UK, and he was refused indefinite leave to remain. He had been in a relationship and he'd got a child with his ex-partner, but the relationship had unfortunately broken down. He was diagnosed as HIV positive in 2006, and he had initially received treatment as an outpatient for a year, but after 2007, his condition wasn't being controlled medically. Come 2010, November, he served his immigration paperwork as an overstayer. And then 2 years later, he was sentenced to 14 months in prison for fraud offences that he committed earlier in 2009. And because of this criminality, he was made the subject of a deportation order. And there's something called the Voluntary Return Service, which is a voluntary deportation service. And this is looked at in the context of unrest in Zimbabwe, and didn't have right to remain. He went into hospital on the 4th of November 2020 under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act because he was found unresponsive at a bus stop. He'd previously been brought to accident and emergency by paramedics. And following concerns about his mental health, but he was removed by security at the hospital because he made some inappropriate comments. His presentation was problematic. So he was doubly incontinent, he was frail, and he was pretty much uncommunicative. Staff found it very difficult to engage with him, and there were various contradictory notes about his incontinence. Also, staff weren't aware that he was HIV positive until quite a way after him on the 23rd of November 2020, and they found that out from the Home Office. When health professionals learnt that he was HIV positive, there wasn't any consideration initially about whether his presentation could be linked to his untreated HIV. He was not considered to be experiencing mental health illness, and he was assumed to have capacity to make decisions, but he wasn't engaging with support services, including the Home Office asylum process, and he was discharged from hospital on the 21st of December 2020, had no fixed abode, and he had no right to public funds either. So 30th of December the same year, he was again found unresponsive at a bus stop, and he was readmitted to hospital. And he was saying that he wanted to discharge himself, even though he was unable to walk, and he refused life-saving surgery. And at this point, practitioners started to doubt his capacity and sought legal advice. And then life-saving surgery was performed under a best interest decision, but unfortunately, he died then on the 13th of February 2021. Okay, and there's some learning here. Professionals felt uninformed and unsupported around Home Office procedure. I think there's a general appreciation that it can be quite complex, and the Home Office can sometimes be difficult to contact. Professionals don't know who to contact for advice when they have concerns regarding a person living with HIV who isn't currently engaging with care support and/or treatment. Changes to an individual's behaviour and mental state could be due to organic or non-organic causes. Capacity, which remains a complex area of practice, and practitioners need to be confident to challenge decisions and to seek advice. There's some confusion sometimes in practitioners around legislation for advocacy services and the language that is used. So, if we say doesn't engage, we're potentially apportioning blame to the person at risk, and this isn't in sort of agreement with a person-centred, strength-based approach which we try and promote. Okay. Thank you very much. And any questions from anybody? All the links to the reports are in the slides, which will be published after the session.
Thanks, Jo. Is there any questions in the chat, or anybody got any questions before we move on? Nope. Okay, so we are going to now hand you over to Alison Taylor-Prow, our designated professional safeguarding adults. And she's going to be talking about developing awareness of unconscious biases. So to you, Alison.
Yeah, brilliant. So if you just start the presentation. So I wrote this on the back of my dissertation in law, which I wrote about biases around the MCA that are towards women. But I think what I took away from it was that there's lots of biases that affect different people in different ways, and that's what I'll talk about today. What I sorry, my phone's ringing, that's very off-putting. What I want to say about this is you know, Jo brought this case to one of the case review groups, the Adult H, and it got me thinking as well about how we work in our system, how we carry out reviews, and how we carry out safeguarding and really guard ourselves against our own unconscious biases. And because I'd done a lot of reading in this area and hadn't expected to discover what I discovered about sort of unconscious biases, and I guess reflecting on my own, which is my personal reflections that I'm not going to share, obviously, we've all got unconscious biases, and it's just finding a way where we can all become more aware of our own biases and find strategies to work with them in a productive way. So next slide, please. So I wanted to just share some of my findings that I sort of sort of felt resonated with Adult H in relation to culture. Think about the impact of unconscious biases on our decision making and safeguarding, and explain really more about what unconscious bias is and how it evolves, because that's what I find really interesting. Some of the historical narratives that affect us today. I think we live in a very advanced technological world, but actually some of our understanding of each other comes from long held prejudiced narratives that have really become embedded within in the frameworks that we use today and reference points. So really it's just about giving you some information. There's lots of references on the presentation at the end and inside the presentation, and because I'm going to have to go through it today, really it is about people, if they're interested in this, taking it away and looking at the links, doing their own reading and thinking about their own biases. And also what it struck me is that there is a real important link between our understanding of trauma-informed practice and a consideration of our biases and the decisions and judgments we make about others and their lives. So that, you know, in the end bits, just some links really to help us look towards being more competent and aware, and finding safe strategies to explore our own biases. Thanks, Heidi. So, yeah, the learning from Adult H was about the Health Trust having equality and diversity training and looking at these unconscious biases. And I think really it's impossible to look at ethnicity without looking at gender as well. And as you see through the presentation, you'll probably realised why. I was interested in biases towards women, but what I also found were some quite shocking biases towards black males, particularly in mental health services that I was aware of but hadn't really given a lot of thought to. So there was system learning in Adult H around professionals not always being sensitive to the risk of intercultural misinterpretation in health and social care. So there's a link there to some wider resources for your reading. Thanks, Heidi. Next slide. Cultural curiosity was a term I hadn't really heard of before, but this is what was found in relation to race and culture in Adult H. So there was little reference to professionals working with Adult H and striving to understand his culture and background. And that's something that I've observed recently in a case review where we have, when we do safeguarding system reviews, we often have a term of reference around somebody's cultural heritage, but I don't always feel, or I think we could do better in terms of bringing people in with that cultural and heritage so that we can at least look through the lens of what that person might be experiencing instead of making our own assumptions, which actually, as you'll see, might be based on some very flawed narratives. So it's not possible for every professional to learn about every culture, but it's having these generic skills such as cultural curiosity and an awareness of the differences that culture and background can produce. So it's just being open-minded and curious, which is what we should be doing in safeguarding anyway. So people found it hard to engage Adult H, but there appears to be no exploration as to whether there were any external cultural influences impacting upon Adult H's emotional availability to engage with professionals. So when we think about things like the MCA and people saying somebody's making an unwise decision, I think if we're not really understanding somebody's culture and their position in the world and how they view themselves and others, I think it's very easy to say it's an unwise decision and believe that's empowered when actually it's absolutely not an empowered decision. So interpreters in healthcare have been shown to improve safety with respect to diagnosis and prescription. It's documented that Adult H could speak English well. This does not necessarily mean that his comprehension of the English language was sufficient to understand the complexities surrounding his situation, particularly when he was in poor health. And I think when we're all busy and working in complex situations, it's hard for us to sometimes bring interpreters on board or think about everything we need to think about. So if we just go to the next slide, because this has been included. Next slide.
Yeah, we're there. I've done it. Sorry. Yeah.
Next one again.
Oh, the next one. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So basically, I looked at all this through what's called this drill down technique, which is thinking about adult H, and then really looking at underneath the problem and really looking at strategies to think about it more deeply. Next slide. So basically, we all have unconscious biases, and they're triggered by our brains automatically making quick judgments and assessments. And I think very fast, I talk fast, and sometimes my brain doesn't always catch up with my mouth and vice versa. So, you know, none of us are immune to it. And it's about our experiences and background that form our biases. This is a really good film. I'm not going to say we'll play it now. It's a short one, but we haven't got a lot of time. So next slide, please. So there's different types of biases. So in the workplaces, we can see these different kinds of biases. So attribution bias, affinity bias, conformity bias, anchoring bias, halo bias, and confirmation bias. So basically, these are all biases that we either look to affirm what we believe, and we have a natural affinity to certain things and not others. And we're all different, and we're all seeking to fit in as well and work with people. So there's some of the examples. Next slide, please. So if we start to think about how biases manifest in society, I was really shocked as I read around how history has influenced us, and how even today the diagnoses that we use around mental illness, the terms we use, the thinking that we have around different genders are actually rooted in some really interesting events in history, and these were, you know, at the time of their events, these were sort of the scientific thinking of the time. And while times have moved on, some of these narratives have been woven into how we understand things today. Next slide, please. So just to illustrate this, I've got some examples of the things that I was particularly interested in. So in 2017, David Lammy, who's a Labour MP, published this independent review into the treatment of and outcomes for Black, Asian and minority ethnic individuals in the criminal justice system. And what he found, in a nutshell, was that while Black, Asian and minority individuals are a minority group in society, they represent a greater number in the prison population, in custody, arrest rates are higher for BAME people, and the way they make decisions and people make decisions within the system themselves is influenced by their race and culture, and it leads to negative outcomes for this group. Next slide, please. Now, also, the independent review of the Mental Health Act, which ties in with both these cases really at some point in their journeys, is that so this was carried out with a view to reforming the Mental Health Act, and what was found with it, there are biases within our system against different groups. So hierarchical ward structures can mirror the negative experience patients have had with other authority figures, and we have heard repeatedly of the distressing and unacceptable experiences from people of ethnic minority communities, and in particular Black Afro-Caribbean men, and fear of what may happen if you're detained, and how long you may be in hospital, and even if you will get out, are all widespread in ethnic minority communities. Next slide. So actually, when you examine some of the literature around diagnoses for women and for people of different heritages, there is some really troubling. I've developed sort of an understanding of how some of our understandings of mental illness can be seen to have origins in slavery, and these have just been collected. And what happened then was, when we developed a scientific model of mental illness, because people at that time didn't have the knowledge and skills we have now to reflect and unpick, these things were brought in terms of women and Black males, and their journey through the mental health system over the last century is deeply troubling, really. And this is why the independent review of the Mental Health Act is so important, because it's enabled this to be discussed and explored, move forward so that we can start to use learning from the LAMI review, the independent review of the Mental Health Act, to make the system better, and to help us all educate ourselves. Next slide, please. Now, I've got some more references if people at the end want to look at the sources for this. But again, if we look at how the Casey review found what she found in the Metropolitan Police around institutional racism and sexism and homophobia, again, rather than looking at individual failings of staff, it's about thinking about the systems that we exist in and how those systems have developed over hundreds of years and brought good things, but also some bad things, and how we really need to see changes. And change really does start with us sort of becoming more aware of some of these really difficult concepts. Next slide, please. So gender again, because we're all different. There's gender and there's race, and there's age as well. And I think I've focused on gender and race here, but as I go through, we'll see that there were other forms of discrimination and biases, but the same principles to unpicking those can be applied. So there was the Women's Health Strategy released by the Department of Health and Social Care, was thinking about how women face inequalities in healthcare, and then part of my dissertation was looking at how this manifests, but also how it came about really, and what might be causing it, and how we can educate ourselves to understand and move forward. So next slide, please. So I looked at some literature and found some really interesting ideas around how, even from the Middle Ages, our medical view of health, wellness and mental health for different genders was really shaped, hundreds of years ago. So an outspoken woman of the 16th century was castigated as a witch. The same woman in the 19th century, a hysteric. The 20th century, she's described as borderline or as having premenstrual dysphoria disorder. So this was one writer's suggestion. And if we look at what happens to women sometimes in mental health services, the negative experiences that service users describe, we can sort of see how this is illustrated. So next slide, please.
You got that?
No.
I've moved it on.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
So one of the authors that I looked at service user experiences, and there's an author called Aves who's a service user, and she did some research with other service users, and basically she called it the research after a comment that was made by one of the participants in a research that if you're not a patient they like, then you have capacity. So this was around biases in decision making around mental illness, and about how people receive treatment. So her website's really interesting if you want a challenging read about mental health services. But interestingly, if you look at research and literature, this Chartronis replicated some research about personality disorder in 2017. Now, they replicated research that was done in the 1980s around personality disorder, and some of their findings around how staff understand and respond to those patient groups was highly discriminatory. So it's interesting that in some ways they found it hasn't moved on, or some views have still been retained in terms of how we view different groups and patient groups by diagnosis, and that often is separated by gender and sadly race as well. There's lots more in the references if people want to look at this more. Next slide, please.
Yep, moved on.
Yeah, so just in terms of males and inequality as well, I mean, and this will affect sort of crossover into race as well as gender is that narrative around boys don't cry. A lot of research around certain illnesses have been done more on men than women and vice versa. But what we see today, I mean, these are slightly old statistics, but they're very similar now, is that the suicide rate in males is a lot higher. And certain groups, I think middle-aged men particularly at the moment, a really high suicide rate in that group. So those inequalities really are affected, and there's really sort of fine lines between the genders really. Next slide, please.
Yep.
So I went on to look at analysis and review of Mental Capacity Act and thinking about unconscious biases. And Alex Ruck-Keene, who is the guru of all things MCA, has concluded, following his research around MCA decision making, that MCA decisions are very much in the eye of the beholder. So it's highly likely MCA assessments are contingent on the legal literacy of the assessor, their clinical skills, their unconscious biases, and their psychological state, as much as it is dependent on the psychological state of the service user and their unconscious biases. So that was kind of my finding around this. And again, those references are at the end. But it was really fascinating, really fascinating research. Next slide, please.
Done.
So what can happen is that we add excessive weight to one way decisions one way or the other, depending on our biases. So the references here are famous cases where it's been pulled out in court that that different people have made different decisions, and we can only ascribe that to people's biases. So these are all for BIAs in the group, these are all cases we'll have heard of. But in King's College Hospital, this case was really publicised in 2015, but two psychiatrists came to the same decision about a lady's decision to refuse dialysis. So one felt she had capacity, one felt she lacked capacity. The judge decided that she had capacity to refuse the dialysis treatment and that she could die, but it had to reach the court for that to be settled. And very much it's about our relationship with that person. So if we have a unconscious or conscious or in somewhere in the middle view about a person and their decision making, that is likely to impact us and impact the person we're assessing as well. So it's really important we think about these things. Next slide, please.
Yep, moved it.
It'll come.
It'll come slow.
Yeah. So the last bit of the presentation, we've looked at some really difficult sort of reflection points really that that can affect our decision making. But David Lammy stated, fair treatment can be best achieved through open discussion, open decision making that is exposed to external scrutiny. So I just think that's I mean, I love David Lammy, so I'm biased by that, but I think that's the best approach, that we can only do our best, that we can be open and we can try our best, and that our decision making is open to scrutiny. Next slide. So within the Mental Health Act, Wesley, who did the review of the Mental Health Act, talked about this concept of epistemic injustice, and it talks about how our biases affect us and how we respond to people. So what happens is there's testimonial injustice, which is the kind of injustice in which someone is wronged specifically in her capacity as a knower. So it happens when somebody's testimony is judged to be not or less credible because of prejudice and not because the testimony itself is unreasonable. So that reflects the experiences of people on the wards who felt that they weren't being seen and heard adequately by staff, and that may have been due to unconscious biases, and that certainly was what Wesley believed. And hermeneutical injustice sounds very fancy and complicated, but basically this is about how society processes and contains those narratives, so that as a social group we interpret things in a certain way. Next slide. So going back to Lami's point, it is about having those open discussions, being reflective and listening, so that those processes don't occur and undermine our decision making and practice. Next slide. So on my learning journey, I discovered intersectionality, which I've got some links for understanding around safeguarding that is the NSPCC do, and how we can look at young people in safeguarding in an intersectional way. So intersectionality is a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves and create obstacles that often are not understood among conventional ways of thinking. So that helps us really. I mean, this was written by a Black feminist educator, but really, you know, it helps us think about how those individuals, so how Adult H and the other case, how they were affected in those crisis situations by those intersecting factors that influence the professionals' decision making and their decision making as well. Next slide, please.
Sorry, it's frozen.
It's good. It makes me take a breath and pause. So White Fragility, I read this year. It's not an easy read, and it's but it really does ask you to think about any difficult feelings, and about how people can find it really difficult to acknowledge their unconscious biases, and that you can then become defensive and say, for example, you don't have any biases, and that, oh, well, and my organisation's fine, we don't have any biases. And I always now, because I've read this book, I think, okay, and you know, it's to be supportive, but we all have them, and it's about being able to sort of own them. You don't have to publicly own them because it is difficult. It's about owning them and dealing with them so that you can do well and do better for other people. Next slide, please. So really, in practice, in safeguarding, it's about being curious, as we've already talked about. It's about challenging yourself and listening to the person that's there in front of you and their experiences, listening to the family and friends. And this can be tough sometimes, you know, when we do case reviews, we come together as professionals, but we're dealing with situations where something really terrible's happened. And sometimes we can get some really tough messages back from people. And it's very easy to think defensively or become defensive, but just, you know, trying to think about that in terms of their experiences and keeping that compassionate perspective to them and to yourself. And again, trauma informed, you know, different people experience different traumas in different ways. And using research to educate ourselves about the lived experience that people have, even if that's hard for us as well. So I try to use supervision and discussions with safe colleagues about being able to reflect on biases and talk about cases where, you know, I've got a colleague who does challenge me sometimes, and that's really good, and hopefully I challenge her. But we both know that we've got a safe space to try and explore some of the issues that we might come across in our daily work. And I do try to challenge injustice or things that I believe to be unfair. And I try to respectfully challenge in practice, but I think sometimes when we're challenging these matters, it can be really difficult. But I think we've got to try and find a way of having safe spaces where we can reflect that we maybe didn't factor somebody's cultural heritage into something, or their gender, or how their gender or cultural heritage might affect their decision making, and how we can understand them better. Next slide, please. So Newcastle Safeguarding Board have got a really good document about safeguarding and cultural diversity, and and unconscious biases, and they've got these 5. I've got the links there for you if you're interested, about valuing diversity, and that's genuinely valuing diversity and embracing it where you can. Cultural self-assessment, so making sure that things aren't tokenistic and we're not doing things as gestures, that we're trying to be meaningful. The cultural background of the person, the subject of the review, and that's really been informative in terms of our learning, and it enables safe discussion as well. So institutionalization of cultural knowledge. So again, that comes back to that epistemic injustice, and about how our institutions can be the home of inadvertent biases, just in the way that they're constructed, and that's happened just because it is one of those things. But now we're aware of them, we can tackle them. And then adapt to diversity. So things change and evolve, and as we learn more, we'll be adapting more. So I've just done it. The rest of the slides are the links. So if people are interested and receive the slides, you can sort of go on your own voyage of discovery like me if you're interested in this topic.
Okay, thanks, Alison. That's great.